I'm too tempted to chip in, so I'm just going to say one thing here. We've got people from, all over the world, but when we said, come to the north of England for a conference, we were aware that this was a really unfortunate moment to invite people to England from especially around Europe. This conference is actually hosted by the European University Chaplains Association or conference. And here we've come to England in the middle of Brexit, next to Ireland, where we weren't so long ago, 4 years ago. And it's nearly embarrassing to welcome people here. And people often laugh at us, don't they, Anthony, for the Brexit disaster we're in. But I don't think it's a laughing matter in Ireland. And I would really like to ask both of you, what's it mean to be European from the Irish and the English perspective, from this corner, or top left corner, or whatever we'll call it, of Europe? And what does it mean in terms of theology, identity, and meaning? And is there any reason why nostalgia was the worst thing that could have been used to persuade people into a Brexit impasse that we're in? Have you two got the answers for us?
Anthony, do you want to go first?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure if I have the answer, but I think I have some answers. I mean, I think one of the challenges for myself, reflecting on Brexit, has been that growing up in England, I have never thought of myself as being European until it was taken away from me. I was first and foremost a Yorkshireman. I've got a UK passport, but I've never felt particularly proud of being English or particularly proud of being British. Yet I would never have called myself European. But once it was kind of taken away from me, I realized that one of the things that has always been important to me, and I think this is some of what Pádraig was saying earlier in terms of his own story, is this invitation to belong, as opposed to the temptation to withdraw and to create boundaries of exclusion. And so for me, I think everything about the EU, for all its faults, and there are immeasurable faults, I mean, it is a neoliberal club. I don't doubt that for a moment. And there are ways in which its operation, certainly in terms of how it has punished poorer countries within that. I think sort of thinking particularly of the attempt of Greece, I think, for example, to try and, through a very radical social government, to affect a different type of economic policy and to have that crushed by the EU. So that's not to say it's not without its problems, but yet there is something about a coming together that really was actually noble, you know? I mean, I think part of our nostalgia is, particularly as English people, is that we have this sort of Churchillian view of World War II that says, you know, it's the plucky English that stood up and beat Hitler. Well, actually, it's the Americans and the Russians who did that. And let's be honest with you. So 30 million Russians, which is actually ironic at the moment again, because I think, whilst again, I have no truck with anything that Putin does, we need to be understood. We need to be very sensitive to history and to the way in which, as Pádraig says, actually, what seems like history to some people actually are part of ongoing existential threats. And so, you know, I mean, if your country was invaded and you lost 30 million people, more than anyone else in World War II, that will have a particular way in which you will also think about your boundaries and think about your neighbours. But let's not get into that. So for me, I think belonging to something that was essentially about countries that are deeply connected will not go to war against each other, hopefully. And therefore, there was something very powerful about the EU, for all its faults, that for me gave me a sense of being part of something bigger. And I think one of the things that I've often taken, and I think, and again, when I listen to sort of steal Pádraig's best lines, the way in which I think he spoke about ACHE and the spirit is something that is intrinsic about bringing us together. And it's intrinsically about, yes, respecting our particular cultural identities and respecting our particularities and specificity, but it's also adding to. So it's not detracting. I don't suddenly become less English because I'm part of the EU. I don't suddenly become less British because I'm sat alongside Germans and French and Italians. Actually, what it says is that I recover a sense of my distinctiveness because I'm alongside other people who are not like me, but yet we have a common cause in terms of being Europeans and trying to work together for the common good. And Brexit, I think, is all the worst instincts of white English nationalism, into which sadly other people were corralled. So one of the interesting things that comes out of the research of Linda Woodhead and Greg Smith is that people who only spoke one language, English, were invariably more likely to vote for Brexit. But anyone who spoke more than one language and therefore had access to another worldview were more likely to vote Remain. And that, I think, therefore says something about cultural, I guess, a heterogeneity, about being broad and sharing and not a closing down, which I think is all the worst instincts of Brexit. Over to you, Pádraig.
Thanks, Anthony. The European Union was given the Nobel Peace Prize in, I'm going to get the year wrong, 2015, 2016. And I think it really deserved it, because one of the things that shows is that in light of two devastating wars at the beginning of the 20th century, that actually boring and somewhat cumbersome administration has prevented further wars within those countries that are part of it. And you need to remember that the wars between those countries were huge and were not just the First and Second World War. Ireland, for instance, was invaded, and so many other places. You think of Sweden and Poland, you think of all of these ways within which borders were fought over, and people were murdered, and young people were sacrificed in the name of what? And I think that the European Union, and I have administered the finances of some European Union peace projects, and I know it can be a pain in the ass, but I still think it deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, because I'd rather have to do boring and sometimes complicated administration instead, and do that as part of a peace project. Peace takes work. Peace isn't easy, and peace is the difficult work of acknowledging the debts we have towards each other, and it is a deep commitment. And peace was committed to when people were on their knees because of civic and population devastation and grief and shock and trauma. And actually, all the research about peace shows that the insights made during those early days of peace are not insights that should be turned back on. But actually, there's something made clear in the aftermath of war that says what's really worthwhile doing is committing to each other in some kind of collaboration. If we think of other zones around the world where daily we hear of bombs or murders or devastations, where the numbers just begin to slip away, and if you thought, my God, could there be some kind of administrative gathering together that would mean in years to come you just hear people complaining about paperwork? Take the paperwork, thank God. Is that going to help? Will there be fewer people being murdered? Will there be fewer grieving families? That's worth any paperwork, holy God. And therefore, some of the ways within which the European Union was spoken about really demeaning about what it means to work for peace. And the European Union, first and foremost, is a peace project, and a successful one by and large. And that, I think, has been very important. Secondly, one of the things that I think, this is picking up on Anthony's word about nostalgia, one of the things that I think is sold as a lie, not just in Britain through the Brexit project, but in many places where there's populism, is that there's nostalgia for a past that didn't exist. People were being told, you're being kept poor, you're being kept marginalized by a system that will change and you'll go back to the flourishing that you used to have. that flourishing didn't happen. In the past, you were poorer in the past than you were now, and had fewer rights, and had fewer accesses to accountability and justice. And so there's a selling of a lie of the past. So it's not even nostalgia. It's untrue. It's saying it used to be like this, and it can be like this again in the future, neither of which are true, because the people promising that aren't interested in sharing a future, and certainly are not telling the truth about how difficult the past was. And that, I think, is something that we all need to be very aware of, whatever jurisdiction we're in any of the Irish jurisdictions, anywhere around the world. I don't think that it's too easy to say that, you know, Brexit was only about that. But I think that Brexit tapped into that, and other populations, all forms of leadership, can tap into saying, vote for me because I'll make things easier for you again, the way they used to be. And we need to learn to query that very, very seriously within the context of any form of public language and communication.
I'll come in again and say that one of our dreams for this conference is that by gathering together and putting in all that effort, quite a lot of which is administrative, especially for those planning the thing, but for all of us simply to make the pure effort of gathering together, is what would the desired outcome be? And we felt from the International Association, it is about building peace by building connections, and building connections beyond the borders of our own lives and between the borders of our lives, so that where we can find a place of peace to dialogue and learn and experience what other people are doing in their peacemaking, whether it's at the US-Mexico border, or if it's in African nations, or if it's in the conflicts at the micro or the macro level, that where we can learn about peacemaking and empower ourselves and equip ourselves, we can go back and do some more peace while maintaining the network. That's our dream. But is our dream for chaplaincy anything like it plays out in the real world, in the world of Brexit division and of this question of where the border falls down the Irish Sea and all the questions like that? Are our aspirations actually in some ways too cozy and comfortable because we're in universities? Is there some harder realities we need to wake up to, and some further warnings that you have for us chaplains and chaplaincies about what needs to happen next about building stronger peace?
Well, first of all, I'd say that university is the real world too. There's lots of real worlds. Living on a small island is the real world. Living in a council estate in the middle of Dublin City is the real world. You know, working in a bank is the real world. Signing on to the dole is the real world. They're all the real world. And again, the question is how aware are those real worlds about each other, and which of those real worlds is impacting on each other negatively, or how are the lines of support working? We're not looking for everybody to have exactly the same experience and cultural identity all the time in order for peace to happen. That's boring and unrealistic and not going to happen. What we are looking for is that those people whose real worlds are ones of opulence or one of absolutely no consequence about what they say or do in public, that their analysis about what the real world isn't imposed on others. And those opulent worlds are the fraction of the fraction. And then we're not just looking at the 1%, because that's far too easy. I'm probably in the 2%. It's far too easy for me to say, I hate the 1%. You know, I have a pretty easy life in some ways. And so I need to think, well, actually, what about me? Where is it that what I consider my real world might in itself be participating in a process that is saying that other people who have been pretty systemically and seriously marginalized, that their real world isn't being taken to change, or by what I think about taxation or how I vote according to taxation. Those are the kinds of things that I think are really important. We are all living in the real world, you know, all the worlds are real. The question is which of the worlds have power, and how do we pay attention to that? And I think that's relevant to the university. The university is absolutely real, but the question is the university's practice of its own realness impacting negatively on itself locally, in the community, in houses that are being purchased, for instance, or in communities that are being taken over by transient populations? How is that impacting on the daily lives and safety and community and exchange just in the local environment. That's one way to practice it. And by doing that, I think it's an embodiment of something that we'd like to see in all other manifestations of power, which is to say that my world is not the only one. And what is the impact of mine locally? And how can I create ties of communication and learning and, very seriously, change, in order to make sure that worlds are in conversation with worlds